Over the weekend, violence suddenly erupted in Mali, with the largest anti-government offensive in more than a decade. The defence minister was assassinated, the rebels recaptured a key town, and Russian troops, who were supposed to be guaranteeing Mali's security, apparently abandoned their Malian counterparts. So in this video, we're going to explain what's happening in Mali, and why it's both embarrassing for Russia and bad for the wider region. If you've read George Orwell's 1984, you might remember the book's three powerful superstates, covering today's US, Russia and China. In the latest issue of Our magazine, we consider how these Orwellian spheres of influence are taking shape, and whether we're entering a new age of empires. That's just one of 72 pages in the magazine, because as always, there's more to too long than you'd expect. Purchase your copy by clicking the link in the description. So, to understand this story, and why it's somewhat embarrassing for Russia, you need a bit of context. In short, before Russia stepped in, France used to be Mali's main security partner and guarantor. France maintained a presence in the country even after Mali declared independence from France in 1960, with the French army providing training and weapons to their Malian counterparts. Mali's main security threat came from the Tuareg, a nomadic tribespeople who mainly reside in northeastern Mali and western Niger, with an estimated total population of about 4 million. The Tuareg were particularly rebellious under colonial rule, with anti-French uprisings in 1911, 1916 and 1917, but weren't granted their own state when the French divvied up their colonial possessions, and were spread across northeastern Mali and western Niger, with smaller populations in Burkina Faso, Algeria and Libya. In Mali, the Tuareg are the dominant ethnic group in the territory north of the Niger River, but comprise less than 10% of the overall population, and see themselves as a discriminated minority. The Tuareg have staged a number of anti-government rebellions over the years, including one in the early 60s and then again in the early 90s. But both times, the Malian government was eventually able to get a lid on things without requiring direct French intervention. However, in 2012, everything went pear-shaped. The entire region had been destabilised by the collapse of Gaddafi's regime in Libya, and Tuareg rebels had coalesced around a new group called the National Movement for the Liberation of Azawad, or MNLA. While the MNLA were nominally a secularist group focused on Tuareg independence via the creation of a new state called Azawad, in 2012 they teamed up with jihadist terror groups in the region against Mali's government. When they advanced towards Mali's population centres south of the Niger River in late 2012, the Malian government made a formal appeal for French help. And so, in early 2013, France launched Operation Serval, which was authorised under UN Security Council Resolution 2085. Operation Serval was remarkably successful. After barely a couple of weeks, and with a relatively small force, France was able to secure basically all territory south of the Niger River, and within a few months, the insurgency looked like it had been squashed. The operation was also incredibly popular with ordinary Malians. A poll done by Al Jazeera at the time found that 96% of Malians in Bamako supported French intervention. Inspired by its success and anxious about the rise of Islamist terror in other Sahel countries, France launched Operation Barkhane, an expanded version of Serval, with some 3,000 French troops working in cooperation with Burkina Faso, Chad, Mali, Mauritania and Niger to root out jihadism in the Sahel. Unfortunately, Operation Barkhane was less successful, and jihadist and sectarian violence continued to escalate, even spilling over into neighbouring countries like Benin and the Ivory Coast. Then, between 2020 and 2023, the region was hit by a spate of military coups in Chad, Burkina Faso, Niger and Mali. The new military juntas basically accused France of neocolonialism and told them to withdraw their troops, and in late 2022, France announced the end of Operation Barkhane. In Mali specifically, the government essentially replaced France with Russia, who deployed a few thousand troops to the country, including from the notorious Wagner Group, and became Mali's main security partner. Originally, it looked like things were going all right. In 2023, with help from Wagner, the Malian government were finally able to recapture the town of Kidal, which had previously been controlled by the Tuareg separatists, and the number of terrorism-related fatalities fell steadily between 2022 and 2025. However, Russian forces were unable to properly restore regional security, in large part because their troop presence was just too small. And last year, the main Islamist group in Mali, the JNIM, imposed a fuel blockade on Bamako and other population centres in the south by setting up checkpoints on the surrounding roads. This has been devastatingly effective. As a landlocked country, Mali is entirely dependent on its coastal West African neighbours for imports of key commodities like fuel. Things escalated dramatically over the weekend, when Tuareg rebels and jihadist groups once again joined forces to carry out a series of coordinated attacks against government positions. Broadly speaking, what seems to have happened is that JNIM carried out a number of terror attacks across the country, including a car bomb which killed Defence Minister Sadio Kamara, while the main Tuareg separatist group in Mali, the Azawad Liberation Front or FLA, led a more substantial offensive on Kidal, with some support from JNIM. Kidal fell almost immediately, and on Sunday, having been surrounded, Russian troops negotiated a withdrawal. Tuareg rebels will presumably now advance towards the city of Gao and then Timbuktu, which would give them control over most of what they call Azawad, which is basically the territory north of the Niger River. Interestingly, however, in Kidal, the withdrawal agreement does not seem to have included Malian troops, who will now be left to the mercy of the jihadists and separatists. This would be consistent with a statement put out by JNIM on Saturday, which basically said that the rebels wouldn't attack Russian troops if they didn't get involved. This is clearly an attempt to drive a wedge between Mali and Russia, which is supposed to be Mali's main security partner, and judging by what happened in Kidal, it seems to have worked. Interestingly, this mirrors what happened in Syria in December 2024. As they were advancing towards Damascus, the HTS rebel group, led by Syria's now President Ahmed al-Sharaa, put out a statement saying that they would have no problems with Russia, which was supposed to be Assad's main security partner, if they stayed out of it. And that's exactly what happened. If something similar happens in Mali, it would be both immensely embarrassing for Russia, but also terrible news for the Sahel. Unlike al-Sharaa and HTS, who have ended up being surprisingly competent and tolerant, JNIM are brutal transnational jihadists, who would most likely impose a hyper-conservative version of Sharia law and use Mali as a launching pad for further attacks on neighbouring countries. Moreover, the alliance between JNIM and the Azawad Liberation Front is a marriage of convenience, motivated by mutual opposition to the Malian government, and chances are they'll just end up fighting each other. This is exactly what happened the last time the Tuaregs and jihadists formed an alliance in 2012. Once they'd taken control of much of northern Mali, they immediately turned on each other, triggering a sort of mini-civil war that was resoundingly won by the jihadists. So you're probably wondering what's next for this story, and how it's going to develop over the coming days and weeks. But it might be overwhelming trying to sift through the thousands of news articles trying to find one that you can trust not to feed you a false narrative. Luckily, we have a simple solution for you, and that solution is Ground News. You've probably heard us talk about Ground News before, the app and website that shows how the same story is covered across the political spectrum. But now more than ever, we need Ground News to truly understand what's really going on in the world around us. It's difficult finding trustworthy news sources, so Ground News will do the hard work for you, compiling thousands of articles and putting them in one easy-to-access place. Each article comes with a breakdown into bias distribution, factuality, and ownership of each individual source. For instance, if we take this story on the recent attacks in Mali, we can easily see that 307 sources are currently reporting on it, with most of the coverage coming from the left. Looking at the headlines, we can dive deeper to understand the differences in reporting on each side, with the left emphasising rebel gains like Kidal captures, and the right shifting the emphasis on the Islamist nature of the threat. Our absolute favourite feature though is their blind spot feed. Here you can see all the stories you might not have seen on your usual feed, so even if you don't agree with the reporting, it's good to step out of your bubble. And it's not just us that feels this way. The Nobel Peace Centre also proudly endorses Ground News, calling it an excellent way to stay informed, avoid echo chambers, and expand your worldview. So, if you want to start questioning the narrative, you can join Ground News today, and using our link you'll get 40% off their unlimited access Vantage plan. All you have to do is subscribe through the link in the description, go to ground.news/TLDR or scan the QR code on screen, and you'll be supporting an independent news platform working to make the media landscape more transparent.